While he was lying in a hospital bed overseas with shrapnel buried in his spine, his own family emptied his bank accounts, sold his home, and erased him from their lives. But 20 years later, a grandfather he barely knew left him one final gift buried beneath a patch of worthless land, and what waited inside would make them regret every single thing they did. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning sun barely touched the hills of eastern Kentucky when Marcus Reeves woke to the sound of his own breathing. It was the same sound he'd heard every morning for 20 years now, shallow, measured, the rhythm of a man who had learned to take nothing for granted, not even air. He lay still for a moment, staring at the water-stained ceiling of his one-bedroom apartment. The place wasn't much: peeling wallpaper the color of old cigarettes, a window unit that wheezed more than it cooled, a kitchen so small you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms wide. But it was his, paid for. No landlord knocking, no eviction notice slipped under the door. After everything he'd been through, that meant more than most people would ever understand. Marcus was 42 years old, though some days his body felt twice that. He swung his legs over the side of the bed slowly, carefully, the way he'd done every morning since the explosion. His left leg responded. His right leg followed with a dull, grinding ache that ran from his hip down to his ankle, a permanent souvenir from an IED outside Kandahar in 2004. The doctors had told him he was lucky to walk at all. Lucky. He'd stopped using that word a long time ago. He reached for the cane leaning against his nightstand, a simple wooden thing, nothing fancy, worn smooth from years of use, and pushed himself upright. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath his weight. He didn't own much: a bed, a dresser, a small television he rarely turned on, a toolbox in the corner filled with wrenches and socket sets and the kind of equipment that let him pick up side work when his body allowed it. Neighbors knew him as the quiet veteran down the hall who could fix anything with an engine. They paid him in cash, sometimes in food, sometimes just in conversation. Marcus didn't mind. He'd learned to survive on less than most people threw away. The bathroom mirror showed him what it always showed: a face carved by time and trouble, salt and pepper stubble, eyes the color of creek water after a storm, deep and tired, a scar that ran along his jawline from a piece of shrapnel the surgeons hadn't been able to remove for 3 days. He splashed cold water on his face, dried it with a towel that had seen better years, and got dressed in the same clothes he always wore: worn jeans, a flannel shirt, boots that had walked through more countries than most people could name. Breakfast was black coffee and toast. He ate standing at the counter, looking out the window at the empty parking lot below. A stray cat picked through an overturned trash can. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valley. Marcus chewed slowly, thinking about nothing and everything at once. This was his life now, quiet, small, alone. He didn't complain. Complaining required believing things could be different, and Marcus had given up on that particular fantasy 2 decades ago. He'd learned the hard way that the world didn't owe him anything, not comfort, not fairness, not even the basic dignity of being remembered by the people who were supposed to love him. He finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and set it in the rack to dry. Then he grabbed his cane and headed for the door. There was a carburetor waiting for him in Old Man Jenkins's garage, and the work wouldn't do itself. The memory came to him sometimes without warning. It usually happened when he was elbow-deep in an engine, hands covered in grease, mind wandering to places he tried to keep locked away. But today, walking down the cracked sidewalk toward Jenkins's place, it hit him like a freight train. 2004, Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany. He remembered the ceiling first: white tiles, fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects, the smell of antiseptic and something else underneath it, something that smelled like endings. He'd been unconscious for 11 days after the explosion. When he finally opened his eyes, a nurse was standing over him, checking his vitals. She smiled when she saw him awake. "Welcome back, Sergeant," she said. "You gave us quite a scare." Marcus couldn't speak at first. His throat felt like sandpaper, and there was a tube running down it that made every breath feel like swallowing glass. But he remembered thinking one thing clearly, one question that burned brighter than the pain in his spine. Where's my family? The answer came 3 weeks later, when he was finally stable enough to make phone calls. He called his mother first, the number he'd had memorized since childhood. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He left a message, his voice shaking, barely recognizable even to himself, telling her he was alive, that he was hurt but recovering, that he loved her and needed to hear her voice. She never called back. He tried his brother Troy next. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Hello?" Troy's voice, flat, distant. "Troy, it's me. It's Marcus." Silence on the other end. Then, "What do you want?" Marcus remembered the confusion that flooded through him, mixing with the morphine and the fear. "What do I want? I want to talk to Mom. I've been trying to reach her for days. Troy, I got hurt. Bad. I'm in Germany. I almost—" "Mom's gone?" The words hit harder than the shrapnel. "What do you mean gone?" "She passed, Marcus. 3 weeks ago. We had the funeral already." Marcus's hand trembled against the phone. "What? No. No, that's not. I didn't know. Nobody told me. Troy, why didn't anyone tell me?" Another silence. Longer this time. When Troy spoke again, his voice was cold. "You weren't here. You're never here. You made your choice a long time ago. Don't act like you care now." "Care? Troy, I was deployed. I was doing my job. I got blown up, for God's sake. I've been unconscious for almost 2 weeks. We handled everything. The house, the accounts, the estate. It's done." Handled? What does that mean? Handled what? "It means what it means. You weren't around to help, so we took care of it. Denise and I. We did what we had to do." Marcus felt the room spinning. "Troy, what did you do?" "Goodbye, Marcus." The line went dead. It took him another month to piece together the full picture. Phone calls to banks, letters to attorneys, requests for records that came back stamped and sealed with the truth he didn't want to believe. While he was lying in a hospital bed with shrapnel in his spine, his brother and sister had convinced their dying mother to sign over power of attorney. They told her Marcus had abandoned the family, that he'd stopped calling, that he didn't care anymore. They whispered poison into her ears during her final days, and she believed them, because what mother wants to think her son abandoned her? They drained his savings account. Every dollar he'd saved over 8 years of service, gone. They sold his truck. The 1997 Ford F-150 he'd rebuilt with his own hands before his first deployment. Sold it for pennies at an auction. They emptied his storage unit. Everything his father had left him, tools, photographs, his grandfather's military medals, the pocket watch that had been in the family for 3 generations. All of it vanished. And when the family asked where Marcus was, Troy and Denise had a story ready. "He abandoned us," they said. "He stopped calling. He doesn't care about anyone but himself. You know how he is." By the time Marcus finally returned stateside, there was nothing left. No mother to greet him, no home to return to, no savings to rebuild. Just a limp that would never fully heal, and a family that had erased him like he'd never existed. He was homeless for almost 2 years after that, sleeping in shelters when he could find space. Sleeping under bridges when he couldn't. Eating out of trash cans on the bad nights. Accepting handouts from strangers on the worse ones. But Marcus Reeves didn't break. He bent, he adapted, he survived, because that's what soldiers do. They endure. Slowly, painfully, he clawed his way back. A job here, a room there, a friend who vouched for him at a garage, a landlord who took a chance on a veteran with nothing but his word. Year by year, he rebuilt something resembling a life. But he never forgot. And he never forgave. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday. Marcus had just finished a brake job on a neighbor's Honda when he walked back to his apartment and found the envelope waiting in his mailbox. It was thick, official-looking, with a return address from a law firm in Richmond, Virginia. Shaw and Callahan, attorneys at law. He frowned, turned it over in his grease-stained hands, and carried it inside. He sat at his kitchen table, the letter resting in front of him like a grenade. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Nothing good ever came in envelopes like this. Bills came in envelopes like this. Lawsuits came in envelopes like this. Reminders that the world was still waiting to take whatever you had left. But he opened it anyway. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a formal letter typed on heavy cream-colored paper. Dear Mr. Reeves, we regret to inform you of the passing of Colonel Raymond Reeves on the 14th of March 2024. Colonel Reeves was 94 years of age at the time of his death. As the designated executor of Colonel Reeves's estate, it is my duty to inform you that you have been named the sole beneficiary in his last will and testament. The inheritance consists of a 40-acre property located in the Appalachian foothills of Virginia, including all structures, contents, and materials therein. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer of deed and related matters. Sincerely, Harold Shaw, ESQ. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he set it down and stared at the wall. Colonel Raymond Reeves, his grandfather. He'd only met the man twice in his entire life. Once at a family reunion when Marcus was 6 or 7, too young to remember much except that the colonel was tall and quiet and wore his uniform even though the war had been over for decades. And once more at his father's funeral when Marcus was 17. The colonel had stood apart from the rest of the family, watching the service from a distance. He'd approached Marcus afterward, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said only 4 words, "Your father was brave." Then he was gone. Marcus had heard stories over the years. The colonel was eccentric, reclusive. He'd cut ties with most of the family after some dispute nobody wanted to talk about. He lived alone on a piece of land in the mountains that everyone called worthless. Scrub brush and rocks and a condemned building that had been falling apart since the Reagan administration. And now somehow that land belonged to Marcus. The second document was a copy of the will itself, legal language, formal clauses. But at the bottom, in handwriting Marcus didn't recognize, shaky, elderly, but deliberate, was a note. They showed me who they are. Marcus showed me who he is. Blood doesn't make family. Honor does. Marcus's throat tightened. He read the note again and again. His grandfather had known. Somehow, across decades of silence, the old man had known what Troy and Denise had done. And he'd remembered Marcus, the grandson he barely knew, the soldier who never stopped serving, the man his own family had tried to erase. The third document was a deed transfer form, already partially filled out. All Marcus had to do was sign. He sat at that kitchen table for a long time, the papers spread before him, the afternoon light shifting across the floor. He didn't cry. He was too tired for that. But something cracked open inside him, some wall he'd built to keep out hope, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt something other than survival. He felt seen. The phone rang 3 days later. Marcus was at Jenkins's garage, elbows deep in a transmission rebuild, when his cell buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands on a rag and checked the screen. The number was unfamiliar, but something about the area code made his stomach clench. He answered anyway. "Hello? Marcus? Marcus, is that you?" The voice hit him like ice water. He hadn't heard it in 2 decades, but he recognized it instantly. "Denise. Marcus, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Listen, I know it's been a long time, and I know things got complicated back then, but..." Complicated? Marcus's voice was flat. Is that what you're calling it? Marcus, please, just hear me out. We heard about Grandpa's passing. Such a tragedy. 94 years old, can you imagine? Anyway, we found out he left you his old property up in Virginia, that piece of land near the mountains. Troy and I were talking, and we think it would be best if we all sat down together and figured out what to do with it. You know, keep it in the family. Split any value 3 ways, like it should be. Marcus said nothing. Marcus, are you there? I'm here. So what do you think? We could drive down this weekend, have dinner, talk things through like adults. I know Troy can be difficult sometimes, but he's willing to let bygones be bygones if you are. Water under the bridge, you know. Marcus leaned against the workbench, gripping his cane so hard his knuckles turned white. 20 years of silence. 20 years of nothing. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas call, not a single word when he was sleeping under bridges trying to survive what they'd done to him. And now, the moment there was something to gain, they came crawling back like nothing had happened. Denise, he said slowly, let me make something very clear. Grandpa left that land to me, not to you, not to Troy, me. He wrote a note in the will explaining exactly why he did it. And I have a pretty good feeling you already know what it says. Silence on the other end. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to hang up this phone. I'm going to drive to Virginia, and I'm going to see what the old man left me. And you and Troy are going to stay exactly where you are. Because if either of you comes within 100 miles of that property, I will make sure every lawyer in 3 states knows exactly what you did to me while I was bleeding out in a hospital bed. Marcus, that's not fair. We were grieving. Mom was dying. We made mistakes, but... Goodbye, Denise. He ended the call, set the phone on the workbench, and stood there breathing heavily. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding. But somewhere beneath the anger, beneath the old wound that had never fully healed, there was something else. Satisfaction. The drive to Virginia took 12 hours. Marcus left before dawn, his beat-up 2003 Chevy Silverado loaded with everything he might need. Tools, water, a sleeping bag, a cooler full of sandwiches and soda. The truck groaned on the hills and coughed on the straightaways, but it held together, the same way Marcus had held together all these years. He drove through Kentucky, through West Virginia, through the winding mountain roads that carved through the Appalachians like old scars. The scenery changed as he climbed, strip malls giving way to forests, highways narrowing to 2-lane blacktop, civilization thinning until there was nothing but trees and sky and the occasional farmhouse set back from the road. By late afternoon, he was close. The GPS on his phone had stopped working an hour ago, no signal this deep in the hills, but the lawyer had sent him detailed directions. Turn left at the old mill, follow the creek for 3 miles, look for the rusted gate with the no trespassing sign. He found it just as the sun began its descent toward the ridgeline. The gate was exactly as described, rusted, leaning, barely standing. A faded sign hung from one hinge, property of R. Reeves, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. The chain that once held it closed had been cut years ago, probably by teenagers or hunters looking for shortcuts. Marcus got out of the truck, his boots crunching on gravel. The air was different here, cooler, thinner, carrying the scent of pine and something older, something that had been waiting. He pushed the gate open and drove through. The road beyond was barely a road at all. 2 tire tracks through overgrown grass, rutted and uneven. The Silverado bounced and groaned, but Marcus kept going. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the dying light into gold and shadow. After half a mile, the trees opened up, and Marcus stopped the truck. Before him lay 40 acres of forgotten land. Rolling hills covered in tall grass and wildflowers. A creek winding through the valley below, its water catching the last light of day. And at the center of it all, surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence half swallowed by vines, stood a building. It wasn't much to look at. Concrete walls, A flat roof sagging in the middle. No windows. A single steel door facing the road, covered in rust and years of neglect. It looked like an old utility structure, maybe a pump house or a storage facility, left to rot when whatever purpose it served had been forgotten. But there was something about it, something that made Marcus's chest tighten. He climbed out of the truck and stood there, leaning on his cane, staring. The wind moved through the grass in waves. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, and Marcus felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He walked the property as the sun sank lower. The locals in the nearest town, a collection of buildings about 15 miles back called Miller's Crossing, had told him stories when he stopped for gas. Everyone knew about the Colonel's place. Nobody went there. "That's the Colonel's Folly," the gas station attendant had said, an old woman with knowing eyes. "Been there since the Cold War. Nobody knows what it was for. But the Colonel, he used to drive out there every week like clockwork, right up until he couldn't drive anymore." Marcus had asked what was inside. The woman had shrugged. "Nobody knows. Nobody was ever allowed past that fence." Now Marcus stood at the edge of that fence, looking at the building his grandfather had protected for 40 years. The chain link was rusted but still intact in most places. The gate had a padlock on it, old, heavy, military grade. He didn't have a key for it. Not yet. But something told him to check inside the building first. The steel door was unlocked. The hinges screamed when he pulled it open, but the door moved. Inside was darkness and the smell of old concrete and something else. Dust maybe, but dust that had been undisturbed for years. Marcus clicked on his flashlight and stepped inside. The room was empty, except for a metal desk against the far wall and a few rusted filing cabinets. No windows, no decoration. Nothing that explained what this place had been or why his grandfather had cared about it so much. But taped to the inside of the door, right at eye level, was an envelope. Marcus's breath caught. The envelope was yellowed with age, sealed with tape that had gone brittle, and on the front, in his grandfather's shaky handwriting, was one word: Marcus. He pulled it free carefully, afraid it might crumble in his hands. Then he walked back outside into the fading light and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The handwriting was difficult to read, the letters trembling, the lines uneven, but Marcus made out every word. "Marcus, you served, you sacrificed. You never stopped being a soldier, even when everyone else stopped believing in you. I know what they did. I know how they hurt you. I spent years watching from a distance, waiting to see who you would become. And you became a man of honor, just like your father. Now it's time you received what soldiers deserve. The key is in the oak. What's below belongs to you. Use it wisely. Col R. Reeves." Marcus read the letter twice. Then he looked up at the property, at the hills and the creek and the old building standing silent in the twilight. The key is in the oak. He turned slowly, scanning the tree line. Most of the trees were pine, but at the edge of the property, standing alone on a small rise overlooking the valley, was a massive oak. It had to be 200 years old at least, its trunk wider than Marcus could wrap his arms around, its branches spreading out like a crown against the darkening sky. He walked toward it. The grass whispered against his boots. His cane found the uneven ground, steadying him. The pain in his leg faded to background noise, replaced by something stronger, anticipation. When he reached the tree, he circled it slowly. The bark was rough, ancient, carved with the marks of decades, and on the far side, about 4 feet off the ground, there was a hollow, a natural gap in the wood, just large enough to fit a hand. Marcus reached inside. His fingers touched something wrapped in cloth. Oilcloth, waterproof, preserved. He pulled it out. Inside the cloth was a key, heavy, brass, military grade, and a photograph. Marcus held the photo up to the dying light. It showed his grandfather, young and strong, standing in full uniform beside a massive steel door built into the earth. Behind him, hills that looked exactly like the ones Marcus was standing on now. The door in the photo was covered in grass and vines, hidden, deliberately concealed. Marcus looked down at the key in his hand. Then he looked out at the property, at the building, at the hills, at the ground beneath his feet. Something was down there. His grandfather had spent 40 years protecting it, and now, whatever it was, it belonged to him. Marcus stood at the edge of the property as the last light faded from the sky. The stars began to emerge, one by one, scattered across the darkness like promises. The air had grown cold, but he didn't move. He just stood there, key in hand, photograph pressed against his chest, staring at the land his grandfather had guarded in silence for 4 decades. He thought about his father, who had died when Marcus was still a teenager. He thought about his mother, who had been poisoned against him in her final days. He thought about Troy and Denise, who had stolen everything and called it family. And he thought about the colonel, the grandfather he barely knew, who had watched from a distance, who had seen the truth when no one else had, who had waited until the very end to reach out. Blood doesn't make family. Honor does. Marcus looked down at the key. Tomorrow he would search for the door in the photograph. Tomorrow he would find out what was buried beneath this land. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, Marcus Reeves allowed himself to feel something he had given up on long ago. Hope. The wind moved through the oak tree above him, rustling the leaves like a whisper, and somewhere beneath the ground, waiting in the darkness, a secret that would change everything was about to be found. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He tried. He laid out his sleeping bag in the bed of the Silverado, wrapped himself in an old army blanket, and stared up at the stars through the gaps in the tree canopy. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the photograph, his grandfather in uniform, the steel door built into the earth, the key resting heavy in his pocket like a heartbeat he couldn't ignore. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, he gave up pretending. He sat up, lit a small camping lantern, and spread the photograph out on the tailgate. He studied every detail, the angle of the hills behind his grandfather, the shape of the tree line, the way the door was positioned relative to the slope of the ground. The photo was old, probably taken in the 1960s or early 70s, but the land itself hadn't changed much. The hills were the same, the creek was the same. Even the oak tree, younger but recognizable, was visible in the corner of the frame. The door had to be somewhere on this property, and when the sun came up, Marcus was going to find it. Dawn arrived slow and golden, spilling over the ridgeline like honey. Marcus was already up, already moving, his cane in one hand and a shovel from his truck in the other. His leg ached from the cold night and the uneven ground, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. It told you where the limits were. It didn't tell you to stop. He started at the building, the concrete structure his grandfather had used as a decoy, a misdirection. There was nothing inside worth hiding, Marcus had realized. It was just a shell, a way to give the property a purpose that didn't invite questions. The real secret was somewhere else. He walked the property methodically, using the photograph as his guide. The hills in the background, the angle of the shadows, the distance from the oak tree. He paced off measurements, compared sight lines, eliminated possibilities one by one. By mid-morning, he had narrowed it down to a section of land about 200 yards east of the main building. The ground there was slightly elevated, covered in decades of leaf litter and fallen branches. It looked like nothing, just another patch of overgrown forest floor. But when Marcus kicked aside the debris, his boot hit something solid. Concrete. His heart started pounding. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the pain that shot through his bad leg, and began clearing away the leaves and dirt with his bare hands. Beneath the organic matter was a layer of soil, packed hard by years of compression. Beneath that, smooth grey concrete. A pad, a platform. Maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, hidden beneath 40 years of nature's camouflage. Marcus grabbed the shovel and started digging. The work was brutal. Every stroke sent pain radiating through his spine. Sweat soaked through his flannel shirt despite the cool mountain air. His hands blistered, then bled, then went numb. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Something was down there, and his grandfather had spent 4 decades making sure it stayed hidden until the right person came along. Marcus was that person. He had to be. By early afternoon, he had cleared the entire pad. The concrete was military-grade, thick, reinforced, designed to withstand blast pressure. And in the center, exactly where the photograph had shown it, was a hatch. It was steel, circular, about 4 feet in diameter. The surface was covered in a layer of rust and grime, but the construction was unmistakable. This wasn't civilian hardware. This was Cold War engineering, the kind of thing designed to survive a nuclear strike and keep functioning for decades afterward. There was a lock mechanism in the center of the hatch, a heavy brass fitting with a keyhole that matched the key Marcus had found in the oak tree. He sat back on his heels, breathing hard, staring at the hatch like it might disappear if he looked away. This was it. Whatever his grandfather had been protecting, whatever secret had been buried beneath this land since before Marcus was born, it was right here, waiting behind 4 inches of Cold War steel. Marcus pulled the key from his pocket. His hands were shaking, not from exhaustion, though that was part of it, from something deeper, anticipation, fear, the weight of a moment he couldn't take back. He leaned forward, inserted the key into the lock, and turned it. The mechanism resisted at first, decades of disuse fighting against him. Then something clicked, deep, resonant, final, and the lock released. A hiss of air escaped from the seams of the hatch, pressurized atmosphere that had been sealed inside since God knows when. The sound made Marcus's skin prickle. It was like the earth itself was exhaling, releasing a breath it had been holding for 40 years. He gripped the handle and pulled. The hatch was heavy, probably 300 pounds of solid steel, but it moved on well-oiled hinges that his grandfather must have maintained until he physically couldn't anymore. It swung open with a groan, revealing a dark opening and the top of a concrete staircase descending into blackness. Cool air wafted up from below, carrying the scent of something old but not stale. Preserved, waiting. Marcus grabbed his flashlight, clicked it on, and began his descent. The stairs went down farther than he expected. 20 steps. 30. 40. The walls were smooth concrete, reinforced with steel beams every few feet. Emergency lighting fixtures lined the ceiling, dead now, but clearly designed to run on backup power. This wasn't a basement or a storm cellar. This was a bunker, a full-scale underground facility built to survive the end of the world. At the bottom of the stairs, Marcus found himself in a short corridor. The flashlight beam revealed a second door at the end, another steel barrier, this one with a wheel lock like something from a submarine. He approached it slowly, his footsteps echoing in the confined space. The wheel was stiff but turned when he applied pressure. The door swung inward and Marcus stepped through into the darkness beyond. What he saw made him stop breathing. The flashlight beam swept across a space so vast it seemed impossible. The ceiling was at least 15 feet high, supported by concrete pillars spaced every 20 feet. The room stretched in every direction, disappearing into shadows that his small light couldn't penetrate. But it wasn't the size that stole his breath. It was what filled it. Rows of steel shelving lined the walls, floor to ceiling, extending back into the darkness like the stacks of some impossible library. And on those shelves, gleaming dully in the flashlight beam, were bars. Gold bars, hundreds of them, thousands of them, stacked neatly, precisely, each one stamped with markings Marcus recognized from his time in the service. U.S. Treasury, Federal Reserve, serial numbers and weight specifications, 12.4 kilograms each, 400 troy ounces, the standard size for government gold reserves. Marcus walked forward in a daze, his cane forgotten, his legs screaming, his mind unable to process what his eyes were seeing. He reached out and touched one of the bars. It was cold, solid, real. Heavier than he expected when he tried to lift it. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. But it was. He moved deeper into the bunker, the flashlight revealing more with every step. Beyond the gold were crates, wooden crates marked with military stencils and classification stamps. He pried one open and found communications equipment inside, vacuum-sealed and pristine. Radio systems he didn't recognize. Encryption devices that looked decades ahead of anything he'd used in Afghanistan. Prototype technology that had never made it to production. Another crate held weapons. Not standard military issue, but experimental designs, rifles with unusual configurations, sidearms with integrated electronics, equipment that belonged in a science fiction movie, not a bunker in the Virginia mountains. Marcus kept walking. The bunker seemed to go on forever. He found filing cabinets next, rows of them, each drawer labeled with dates and project codes. He pulled one open at random and found documents, reports, memos, operational orders, all stamped top secret in faded red ink. He scanned the pages, catching fragments. Operation Failsafe. Contingency Protocol 7. Strategic Asset Preservation. His grandfather had been part of something big, something that never officially existed. What happens next will turn this story upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest heroes carry the most weight. Stay tuned to see what unfolds. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Beyond the filing cabinets, Marcus found a separate chamber. The door was unlocked, the room smaller than the main vault, but no less extraordinary. Inside were display cases, glass-topped tables arranged like a museum exhibit, and under that glass were artifacts, Nazi memorabilia, SS daggers with ivory handles, medals and insignia from the Third Reich, documents signed by names Marcus recognized from history books. All of it recovered, he realized, by American forces at the end of World War II. Spoils of war that had been quietly collected and hidden away instead of being returned or destroyed. There was more. Soviet materials, intelligence reports, decoded transmissions, photographs of missile installations and military bases. Items from operations that officially never happened, conflicts that were never acknowledged, missions that existed only in classified files, and the memories of men who had sworn to take their secrets to the grave. Marcus stood in the center of that chamber, turning slowly, trying to comprehend the scope of what surrounded him. This wasn't just a bunker. This was a vault. A repository of Cold War history, strategic assets, and enough gold to buy a small country. And his grandfather had protected it alone for 40 years. Marcus found the desk in a corner of the main chamber, tucked between two rows of shelving like an afterthought. It was military surplus, grey steel, functional, unadorned. But on top of it sat something that made Marcus's chest tighten, a leather-bound journal, and beside it a stack of folders. He sat down in the chair behind the desk, his leg finally giving out, and opened the journal. The handwriting was his grandfather's, the same shaky script from the letter in the envelope, but earlier entries were cleaner, steadier, written by a younger man with a firmer hand. The first entry was dated March 15, 1962. Received orders today, Operation Stone Garden. Classified above top secret. Briefing at the Pentagon next week. Margaret doesn't know. She can never know. Marcus flipped forward, scanning entries that spanned decades. June 1964. Facility construction complete. 12 months ahead of schedule. Assets transferred and secured. Only 4 people know the location. I am now one of them. November 1972. Annual inspection. All systems operational. Gold reserves intact. Artifact collection catalogued and preserved. Sometimes I wonder if anyone remembers this place exists. August 1983. Received termination order. Program dissolved. Instructed to destroy all materials and collapse the facility. I told them it was done. It wasn't. Some things are too important to erase. Marcus read faster, his heart pounding. December 1989. Berlin Wall fell. Cold War ending. The world is changing, but the assets remain. Someone may need them someday. Someone who understands what sacrifice means. February 2004. Learned about Marcus today. My grandson, wounded in Afghanistan. They say he might not walk again. They say his own family betrayed him while he was bleeding for his country. I know that feeling. I know what it means to be forgotten by the people who should love you most. Marcus's hands trembled. The entry continued. I've been watching him from a distance. He's strong. Stronger than his father was, God rest his soul. Stronger than me, maybe. He doesn't know I exist. Doesn't know I've been keeping records, following his recovery, reading the reports. But I see him. I see who he is. And when the time comes, he'll understand. The journal went on for another 100 pages. Maintenance logs, security checks, inventory counts. But woven throughout were personal reflections. A lonely old man's thoughts about family, duty, regret, and hope. The final entry was dated January 2nd, 2024. Just 2 months before the colonel died. I don't have much time left. The doctors say weeks, maybe a month. But the will is written. The lawyers have their instructions. Marcus will inherit everything. The land, the building, and what's below. His brother and sister will get nothing. They don't deserve it. They proved who they are when they destroyed him. Marcus proved who he is by surviving anyway. I never got to know my grandson. That's my greatest failure. I was too proud, too afraid of what closeness might cost. But I hope when he finds this place, he understands. I wasn't just protecting golden secrets. I was protecting something for him. A second chance, a legacy. Proof that someone in his family saw him for who he really was. Some things are worth more than money, but Marcus has earned both. Marcus closed the journal. His eyes were burning. His throat so tight he could barely breathe. He sat in the dim light of the bunker, surrounded by gold and secrets and the weight of a history he never knew existed, and he felt something crack open inside him. For 20 years, he had believed he was alone, abandoned, forgotten. He had rebuilt his life from nothing, expecting nothing, trusting no one. And all that time, somewhere in Virginia, an old man he barely knew had been watching, waiting, believing in him when no one else did. The folders on the desk called to him next. Marcus reached for them with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. There were 5 in total, each one labeled with a date range. The last one, the thickest, had his name on it. He opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Handwritten letters his grandfather had written to Marcus over the years, but never sent. The first was dated 2005, 1 year after Marcus was wounded. Dear Marcus, I heard what happened. I heard what they did to you. If I were a younger man, I would drive to Kentucky and make them answer for it. But I'm old now and the law doesn't work the way it used to. So I'm writing this letter instead. You'll probably never read it, but I need to say it anyway. You are not what they said you are. You are not a deserter or a coward or a man who abandoned his family. You are a soldier who served with honor, who nearly died for his country, who was betrayed by the people who should have protected you. I know that feeling. I've lived with it for 60 years. Your father was the same way, good and brave and too trusting. I wasn't there for him the way I should have been. I let pride and distance and stupid old man's stubbornness keep us apart. And then he was gone, and it was too late. I won't make the same mistake with you. Even if you never know it, I'm watching. I'm proud of you. And when I'm gone, you'll understand. Your grandfather, Raymond. Marcus read letter after letter. Each one was a window into his grandfather's mind, his regrets, his hopes, his fierce belief in a grandson he'd never really known. The colonel had tracked Marcus's recovery, celebrated when he walked again, mourned when he learned Marcus was homeless, rejoiced when he clawed his way back to stability. One letter, dated 2012, made Marcus's breath catch. Marcus, I drove through Kentucky last month. Didn't tell anyone, just wanted to see. I parked across the street from your apartment building and watched for an hour. You came out around noon, walked to a garage down the block, started working on someone's truck. You were limping, but you were moving, fixing things, surviving. I almost got out of the car, almost walked over and introduced myself. But I couldn't. I was afraid you'd see me as just another person who abandoned you, another family member who showed up too late. So I drove away, but I watched you in my rearview mirror until you disappeared, and I made a decision. When I die, everything I've protected will go to you, not because you need it, but because you've earned it, because you're the only one in this family who understands what honor means. I hope you can forgive an old man his cowardice. I hope, when you finally read this, you'll understand that I saw you. I always saw you. Marcus set the letter down. His face was wet. He hadn't realized he was crying. He sat in that bunker for hours, reading every letter, absorbing every word. The gold around him faded to background noise. The artifacts and weapons and classified documents became irrelevant. What mattered was this: these pages filled with handwriting that trembled more with each passing year, carrying the voice of a man who had loved him from a distance and regretted every mile between them. When he finally finished, Marcus stood slowly, his legs screaming, his heart heavier than it had ever been. He walked the rows of gold one more time, not counting, not calculating, just seeing. His grandfather had spent 40 years maintaining this place, checking the climate controls, updating the inventory, keeping everything ready for the day when someone worthy would inherit it. And he had chosen Marcus, not Troy, not Denise, not any of the other relatives who had shown up at family reunions and forgotten about the eccentric old colonel the moment they left. Marcus, because blood doesn't make family, honor does. Marcus ascended the stairs slowly, his body exhausted, his mind swimming. The afternoon sun hit him like a wave when he emerged from the hatch, so bright after the dim bunker that he had to shield his eyes. He sealed the hatch carefully, testing the lock twice to make sure it was secure. Then he walked to the oak tree at the edge of the property and sat down with his back against the ancient trunk. The valley spread out before him, green and gold in the late light. The creek sparkled in the distance. Birds sang in the trees. And Marcus Reeves, the man who had been erased by his own family, the soldier who had lost everything and rebuilt from nothing, sat alone with a secret worth $260 million and cried. Not from pain this time, not from anger or grief or despair, from being seen. His grandfather had watched him for 20 years, had tracked his struggles and celebrated his survival, had written letters full of love and regret that Marcus was only now reading, years after the old man's hand had grown too weak to hold a pen. And in the end, Raymond Reeves had given his grandson everything. Not because Marcus needed gold or secrets or Cold War artifacts, but because he needed to know that someone in his family had believed in him, that someone had seen his honor when everyone else saw only a man to be used and discarded. Marcus sat beneath that oak tree until the sun touched the ridgeline. His tears dried, his breathing steadied, and slowly, carefully, a new feeling began to take shape in his chest. Not hope, he'd felt that last night. This was something stronger, something more dangerous. Purpose. His grandfather had protected this vault for 40 years, waiting for the right person to inherit it. Now that person was here, and Marcus wasn't going to let the old man down. But he also wasn't naive. A secret this big, a treasure this valuable, it wouldn't stay hidden forever. The government would have questions. His siblings would come sniffing around again. Lawyers, investigators, reporters, they would all descend eventually. He needed help, someone he could trust absolutely. someone who understood the law and the military and the particular kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought. Marcus pulled out his phone. No signal, of course, not this deep in the mountains, but he knew what he had to do. He climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and began the long drive toward civilization, toward a phone tower, toward the one person in the world he still trusted completely. The call connected on the third ring. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was deep, cautious, instantly familiar. "Sam, it's Marcus." A pause, then, "Marcus Reeves? Holy hell, man, it's been, 5 years? 6? Where are you?" "Virginia, the mountains. Listen, Sam, I need your help." "Anything. You know that. What's going on?" Marcus gripped the steering wheel, staring at the road ahead. The words felt impossible even as he said them. "I found something my grandfather left me. It's big, Sam, bigger than anything I can handle alone, and I think people are going to come for it." Another pause, longer this time. When Samuel spoke again, his voice was different, sharper. The voice of a man who had spent 20 years in combat zones and another 10 navigating the legal minefields of veteran affairs. "How big are we talking?" Marcus exhaled slowly. $260 million big, maybe more. Cold War bunker, gold reserves, classified materials, artifacts. The whole thing has been hidden under a piece of land in Virginia since 1962, and my grandfather just left it to me in his will. Silence on the line. Then Samuel laughed. Not a humorous sound, more like the sound a man makes when the world stops making sense. "You're serious? Dead serious? Jesus Christ, Marcus." "Yeah." Okay, listen to me. Don't tell anyone else. Don't go back to that bunker until I get there. Don't sign anything. Don't file anything. Don't even look at a lawyer who isn't me. Where can I meet you?" Marcus thought for a moment. "There's a town called Miller's Crossing about 15 miles from the property. Gas station, couple of diners. I can wait there. I'm in D.C. I can be there by tomorrow morning. 8 hours, maybe 9. Can you hold tight until then?" "Yeah, I can do that." "Good. And Marcus?" "Yeah?" Samuel's voice softened just slightly. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out. You're not alone in this. You hear me? You're not alone." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. A knot he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. "Thanks, Sam." "Don't thank me yet. This sounds like the kind of thing that's going to get real complicated real fast." "Story of my life." Samuel laughed again, warmer this time. "See you tomorrow, brother." The line went dead. Marcus set the phone on the seat beside him and kept driving. The mountains rose around him, dark shapes against a darkening sky. Somewhere behind him, buried beneath 40 acres of forgotten land, a vault full of gold and secrets waited in the darkness. His grandfather had protected it for 40 years. Now it was Marcus's turn. He didn't know what was coming. Lawyers, probably. Government investigators. Maybe his siblings, circling like vultures, desperate to get their hands on something they didn't deserve. There would be battles ahead, legal, personal, emotional. But for the first time in 20 years, Marcus Reeves wasn't facing them alone. He had a friend coming. He had a purpose burning in his chest. And he had the memory of a grandfather who had seen him when no one else did, who had watched from a distance and believed in him when believing seemed impossible. Some things are worth more than money. But Marcus had earned both, and he was going to protect them. Samuel arrived at Miller's Crossing just after 7 the next morning. Marcus was sitting in a booth at the back of Patty's Diner, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee and watching the door. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw gold bars stretching into darkness. He saw his grandfather's handwriting, trembling across decades of unsent letters. He saw the weight of $260 million pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. When the door swung open and Samuel walked in, Marcus felt something release in his chest. Relief. Trust. The particular comfort of seeing someone who had bled beside you and never wavered. Samuel Washington was 51 years old, built like a linebacker who had never quite stopped training. His head was shaved clean, his beard was flecked with grey, and his eyes carried the same sharpness they had 20 years ago when he was Marcus's platoon sergeant in Afghanistan. These days, he wore suits instead of body armor, but the intensity was the same. He spotted Marcus immediately, crossed the diner in 4 long strides, and slid into the booth across from him. "You look like hell," Samuel said. "Feel like it too." Samuel studied him for a moment, the bags under his eyes, the coffee tremor in his hands, the way Marcus sat like a man waiting for the next explosion. Then he leaned back and exhaled. "Okay, tell me everything," Marcus told him. He started with the letter from the lawyer, the inheritance, the 40 acres of worthless land that everyone in the family had refused. He described the drive to Virginia, the property, the building that was nothing but a shell. He told Samuel about the envelope taped inside the door, the letter from his grandfather, the key hidden in the oak tree. And then he described what he'd found beneath the ground. Samuel's expression didn't change as Marcus spoke. He was too seasoned for that. But his eyes grew wider with each revelation. The bunker, the gold, the classified documents, the artifacts from wars that officially never happened. By the time Marcus finished describing his grandfather's journal and the unsent letters, Samuel was gripping his coffee cup so hard his knuckles had gone pale. 260 million, Samuel repeated slowly, give or take. Cold War bunker, government gold, classified materials. All of it. Samuel shook his head, not in disbelief, but in the particular way a man does when the universe suddenly stops making sense. And your grandfather just kept it for 40 years, by himself. He was supposed to destroy it. They shut the program down in the 80s, told him to collapse the facility and burn the records. He lied, said it was done. Then he spent the rest of his life protecting it. Why? Marcus thought about the journal entries, the letters, the careful, meticulous maintenance logs that documented decades of solitary guardianship. Because he believed some things were too important to erase, Marcus said, because he thought someone might need it someday, someone who understood what sacrifice meant. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he drained his coffee, set the cup down, and looked Marcus straight in the eyes. "Show me." The drive to the property took 20 minutes. Samuel followed in his own car, a black SUV with government plates that Marcus tried not to think too hard about. They parked at the gate, walked the overgrown road together, and stood in front of the sealed hatch in silence. Marcus unlocked it. The hydraulics hissed. The steel door swung open. They descended into darkness. Marcus had seen the bunker before, had spent hours walking its rows and reading its secrets. But watching Samuel experience it for the first time was like seeing it again through fresh eyes. Samuel didn't speak for 5 full minutes. He walked the rows of gold slowly, reaching out to touch the bars like he needed to confirm they were real. He opened crates and examined equipment. He pulled documents from filing cabinets and scanned them with the practiced eye of a man who had spent years navigating military bureaucracy. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Marcus, do you understand what you're standing in?" "I'm starting to." Samuel turned to face him, his expression grave. "This isn't just money. This is history. This is evidence of operations that were never supposed to exist. Some of these documents," he held up a folder marked Operation Failsafe, "could rewrite the Cold War narrative. Governments have toppled over less." "I know." "And the gold. Marcus, the gold alone makes you one of the wealthiest private individuals in the country. Do you understand the kind of attention that's going to bring? The kind of people who are going to come knocking?" Marcus met his friend's gaze. "That's why I called you." Samuel stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. Acceptance, maybe, or the particular resolve of a soldier who had just been given a new mission. "Okay," he said. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We document everything. Photographs, inventories, legal descriptions. We create a chain of custody that proves you inherited this legitimately and that you've maintained it responsibly. Then we figure out what belongs to you, what belongs to the government, and what falls into the grey zone in between." "And if the government wants it all?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "Then we fight, but we fight smart. Your grandfather kept records for 40 years. Every maintenance log, every inventory check, every communication with his superiors. If he was as meticulous as you say, there's a paper trail that proves he was given discretionary authority. We find that trail, and we use it." They spent the next 3 days in the bunker. Samuel brought equipment: cameras, scanners, a laptop with encryption software that Marcus didn't ask about. They photographed every gold bar, every crate, every document. They created spreadsheets and databases and backup files stored on drives that Samuel kept in a fireproof safe in his SUV. They worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and protein bars and the particular energy that comes from being part of something bigger than yourself. And slowly, methodically, they transformed chaos into order. By the end of the 3rd day, they had a complete inventory. 14,000 gold bars, each weighing 12.4 kilograms. Total gold value, approximately $152 million at current market prices. Military equipment and prototype technology, estimated value between $40 and $60 million, depending on collector interest and historical significance. Classified documents and artifacts, value uncertain but significant to historians, governments, and intelligence agencies worldwide. Total estimated worth of the bunker's contents, $263 million. Samuel sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "You're rich, Marcus. Genuinely, absurdly, life-changingly rich." Marcus stared at the spreadsheet on the laptop screen. The numbers didn't feel real. They were just digits, abstractions, mathematical representations of something too vast to comprehend. "Doesn't feel like it," he said quietly. "It will. Once the lawyers get involved, once the government starts asking questions, once your family finds out." Samuel paused. "Speaking of which, how long before Troy and Denise come sniffing around?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "They already called, before I even saw the property. Wanted to talk about keeping it in the family, splitting the value 3 ways. "And you said?" "I told them to stay away." Samuel nodded slowly. "They won't. Not when they find out what's down here. People like that, they can smell money from 1,000 miles away, and they'll do whatever it takes to get their hands on it." "Let them try." "Marcus, I mean it, Sam." Marcus's voice was hard. The softness burned away by 20 years of surviving what his siblings had done to him. "They stole everything from me. My savings, my father's belongings, my relationship with my mother. They told the whole family I was a deserter. They let me sleep under bridges while they lived in the house I helped pay for." He paused, breathing hard. "They don't get to show up now and pretend we're family. Not after what they did. Not ever." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and gripped Marcus's shoulder. "I understand, and I'm with you. But you need to be ready. This is going to get ugly before it gets better." Marcus nodded. "I know." "Good. Because in my experience, the wolves always come. The only question is whether you're ready for them." The wolves came exactly 8 days later. Marcus was at the property checking the bunker's ventilation system when he heard the sound of engines coming up the road, multiple vehicles, moving fast. He climbed out of the hatch and walked to the edge of the tree line just in time to see 3 cars pull up to the gate: a black Mercedes, a white SUV, and a silver sedan with a lawyer's logo on the door. Troy stepped out of the Mercedes first. Marcus hadn't seen his brother in 20 years, but he recognized him immediately. The same sharp features, the same calculating eyes, the same air of entitlement that had always made Marcus's skin crawl. Troy was wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck, and his hair was slicked back with the kind of product that screamed money. Denise emerged from the SUV, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue like she'd been crying. She was heavier now, softer, but her face still carried that particular blend of self-pity and manipulation that Marcus remembered from their childhood. And behind them, climbing out of the sedan, was a man in a three-piece suit carrying a leather briefcase, their lawyer. Marcus walked toward them slowly, his cane finding solid ground with each step. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. His silence said everything. Troy saw him first. His expression flickered, surprise maybe, or the particular discomfort of a man confronted by someone he'd wronged. But he recovered quickly. He spread his arms wide, a smile stretching across his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus, brother, look at you, it's been too long." Marcus stopped 10 feet away. "Not long enough." Troy's smile faltered. "Now, Marcus, let's not be hostile. We're family. We came all this way to talk, to work things out. Grandfather's passing has been hard on all of us." "Grandfather." Marcus's voice was flat. "You didn't even know him. You never visited, never called, never sent a card on his birthday. But now that he's dead and left something behind, suddenly you're concerned about family." Denise stepped forward, her eyes wet, her voice trembling. "Marcus, please, I know things got complicated after Mom died. I know we all said things we didn't mean, but we're still blood. We're still the only family each other has. Grandpa would have wanted us to be together, to share what he left behind." Marcus stared at her. For a moment, just a moment, he let himself remember the sister he'd had once, the girl who used to follow him around when they were kids, who used to sit beside him at the dinner table and laugh at his jokes, who used to write him letters when he was deployed, before the letters stopped and the silence began. That girl was gone, had been gone for a long time. What happened next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. "You want to talk about what Grandpa wanted," Marcus said quietly. "Fine, let's talk. He left a will. I'm sure your lawyer has a copy. You know what it says. You know he left everything to me, not to you, not to Denise, not to anyone else, just me." The lawyer stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Reeves, my clients believe the will may have been drafted under undue influence. Colonel Reeves was 94 years old at the time of his death. There are questions about his mental capacity, about whether he was manipulated by—" "By who?" Marcus cut him off. "By me? The grandson he met twice in his entire life? The man who lives in a one-bedroom apartment in Kentucky fixing other people's cars? You think I drove to Virginia and manipulated a 94-year-old military officer into signing over a piece of land everyone else in the family called worthless?" The lawyer's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Marcus took a step closer. "I have documents. I have his journals. I have letters he wrote explaining exactly why he made the choices he made. And do you know what those letters say?" He paused, letting the silence stretch. "They say he knew what you did to me. He knew about the power of attorney you talked Mom into signing. He knew about my savings account, my truck, my father's belongings. He knew you told everyone I'd abandoned the family while I was lying in a hospital bed in Germany with shrapnel in my spine." Denise's face went pale. Troy's smile had vanished completely. "He watched me for 20 years, Marcus continued. "He watched me lose everything and rebuild from nothing. He watched me survive what you did to me, and then he wrote a note in his will that says," Marcus's voice hardened, "blood doesn't make family. Honor does." He let that sink in. "So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in your cars. You're going to drive back to wherever you came from. And you're going to forget this property exists. Because if you try to contest this will, if you try to come after what Grandfather left me, I will make sure every court in 3 states sees exactly what kind of people you are." Troy's face had gone red. His hands were clenched at his sides. "You don't get to talk to us like that. You don't get to... Get off my land." The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of 20 years of pain, 20 years of silence, 20 years of rebuilding from nothing. Troy stared at him. Denise was crying openly now, not sad tears, Marcus realized, but frustrated ones. The tears of someone who wasn't getting what they wanted. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Samuel's voice came from behind Marcus, calm and professional. "I'd recommend following Mr. Reeves's advice. This property is private, and you're trespassing. Any legal challenges to the will can be handled through proper channels. But right now, you need to leave." Marcus hadn't heard Samuel approach, but he wasn't surprised. Sam had always been good at appearing exactly when he was needed. The lawyer looked at Samuel, then at Marcus, then back at his clients. Whatever he saw in their faces apparently convinced him this wasn't a fight worth having. "We'll be in touch," he said stiffly. "Looking forward to it," Samuel replied. They watched the 3 cars turn around and drive back down the overgrown road, disappearing into the trees. Marcus stood there until the sound of their engines faded completely. "That went well," Samuel said dryly. Marcus didn't laugh. He just stared at the empty road, his hands still trembling from adrenaline and anger and something else he couldn't name. "They'll be back." "I know. They'll bring lawyers, file challenges, try to tie this up in court for years." "I know." Samuel put a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'd better be ready." The government arrived 2 weeks later. This time there was no warning, no phone call, no certified letter. Just 3 black SUVs rolling up the road at 9 in the morning, followed by a convoy of unmarked vehicles that looked like they belonged on a military base. Marcus was ready. Samuel had warned him this would happen. Had spent the past 14 days preparing documents, organizing evidence, building a legal framework that would withstand federal scrutiny. The woman who stepped out of the lead vehicle was tall, professional, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a navy suit and carried herself with the kind of authority that came from decades of government service. "Mr. Reeves," she extended her hand. "Agent Carla Webb, Department of Defense. I believe you've been expecting us." Marcus shook her hand. "I've been expecting someone." Agent Webb smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure you have. May we speak inside?" They sat at a folding table Samuel had set up near the main building, the same table where they'd spent countless hours cataloguing the bunker's contents. Agent Webb placed a thick folder on the surface, her expression neutral but watchful. "Mr. Reeves, I'll be direct. We're aware of the facility beneath this property. We're aware of its contents, and we're here to discuss the legal implications of your inheritance." "I assumed as much." The assets in that bunker were originally property of the United States government. Gold reserves, military equipment, classified documents. Under normal circumstances, all of it would revert to federal custody. Marcus nodded slowly. "Under normal circumstances." Agent Webb's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem remarkably calm for a man facing potential federal seizure of his inheritance." "Agent Webb, my grandfather spent 40 years protecting that bunker. He maintained it. He catalogued it. He kept meticulous records of every maintenance check, every inventory, every communication with his superiors. And he did all of that because he believed he had the authority to do so." Marcus slid a folder across the table. "This is a copy of the original Operation Stone Garden Protocols. Section 7, Paragraph 4 authorizes the facility commander to exercise discretionary judgment regarding asset preservation in the event of program termination. My grandfather was that commander. When the program was dissolved in 1983, he received orders to destroy the facility. He also received a classified addendum giving him authority to preserve selected assets if, in his judgment, they might serve future national interest." Agent Webb opened the folder. Her expression didn't change as she read, but Marcus saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "He kept the addendum," she said. "He kept everything, every order, every authorization, every piece of paper that proved he was acting within his legal authority." Marcus paused. "My grandfather was a lot of things, Agent Webb, but he wasn't a thief, he wasn't a traitor. He was a soldier who believed in his mission, even when everyone else forgot it existed." The negotiations took 3 months. Lawyers, depositions, classified briefings that required security clearances Marcus didn't technically have. Meetings in Washington and Richmond, and offices with no windows, and men in suits who never gave their real names. Through it all, Marcus stayed calm, stayed focused. Let Samuel handle the legal complexities while he did what he'd always done best, endured. Some nights, when the meetings were over and the lawyers had gone home, Marcus would descend into the bunker alone. He would walk the rows of gold, run his fingers along the filing cabinets, sit at his grandfather's desk and read the journals he'd left behind. Colonel Raymond Reeves had been more than a guardian of Cold War secrets. He'd been a soldier in Korea, an advisor in Vietnam, a man who had given 50 years of his life to serving a country that had mostly forgotten he existed. The journals told stories Marcus had never heard, missions that went wrong, friends who didn't come home, decisions that haunted the old man until the day he died. And woven through all of it, like a thread connecting past to present, was his grandfather's hope for redemption. "I failed my son," one entry read. "I was gone too much, too distant, too wrapped up in missions I couldn't talk about. By the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late. He was gone and I could never make it right. But Marcus is different. He's the man my son should have been, the man I should have been. If I can give him this one thing, maybe it will matter. Maybe it will prove that some things can be saved, even after they've been forgotten." Marcus found one more letter during those long nights, buried in the bottom drawer of the desk, unsealed but never sent. It was addressed to Troy and Denise. "To my grandchildren, I've written this letter 100 times. I've torn it up 100 more. But I need to say what I've been thinking for 20 years, even if you never read it. What you did to your brother was the most dishonorable act I have witnessed in my 90 years of life. You stole from a wounded soldier. You poisoned your dying mother against him. You let him become homeless while you lived in comfort on money that was rightfully his. I watched you do it. I watched and did nothing because I was too old and too far away and too afraid of what getting involved would cost. That's my shame, and I'll carry it to my grave. But I will not compound that shame by rewarding you. My will is clear. Marcus gets everything. Not because he needs it more than you do, but because he earned it, because he survived what you did to him and became a better man than you'll ever be. You are no longer my grandchildren, not in any way that matters. Blood made you family. Your choices made you strangers. Do not contest the will. Do not try to take what doesn't belong to you. If you do, I've made arrangements to ensure the truth comes out. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence that proves what you did while your brother was bleeding for his country. This is not a threat, it's a promise. From a soldier who kept his promises for 50 years, even when no one was watching. Cole Raymond Reeves. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, placed it in his pocket, and sat in silence for a long time. His grandfather had seen everything, had known everything, had spent years watching from a distance, documenting the truth, preparing for the day when it might finally matter. And now it did. The federal ruling came on a Tuesday. Judge Patricia Hamilton, Eastern District of Virginia, delivered the decision in a packed courtroom. Marcus sat at the defendant's table with Samuel beside him, his hands folded, his expression neutral. Across the aisle, Troy and Denise sat with their lawyer, a different one now, more expensive, brought in specifically to handle the federal complications. They'd spent the past 3 months filing motions, demanding discovery, claiming that Marcus had somehow manipulated both their grandfather and the government. None of it had worked. After reviewing the evidence presented by all parties, Judge Hamilton said, her voice clear and formal, this court finds the following. The will of Colonel Raymond Reeves was properly executed and reflects his clear, coherent intent to designate his grandson, Marcus Reeves, as sole beneficiary. She paused, looking directly at Troy and Denise. The claims of undue influence are without merit. Colonel Reeves was of sound mind at the time the will was drafted, as confirmed by multiple independent medical evaluations. The contestants have presented no credible evidence to support their allegations. The lawyer started to rise. Judge Hamilton cut him off with a look. Furthermore, she continued, regarding the federal government's interest in the bunker's contents. The court finds that Colonel Reeves acted within his legal authority under Operation Stone Garden protocols when he preserved the facility and its assets. The classified addendum submitted into evidence clearly grants discretionary judgment to the facility commander regarding asset preservation. She lifted a document from her desk. Accordingly, the bulk of the assets, including the gold reserves, are ruled to be the legal property of Marcus Reeves under abandoned property statutes. The government retains custody of certain classified documents and sensitive artifacts for which Mr. Reeves will be fairly compensated. Marcus felt Samuel's hand grip his arm. The final valuation of the inheritance, after government compensation for retained materials, is $263 million. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Troy was on his feet, face red, shouting something at his lawyer that Marcus couldn't hear over the noise. Judge Hamilton banged her gavel. The contestant's challenge is dismissed with prejudice. This case is closed. She looked at Marcus, and for just a moment, something softened in her expression. Mr. Reeves, your grandfather would be proud. Outside the courthouse, the chaos was even worse. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, cameras trained on Marcus like weapons. Questions flew from every direction, about the gold, about his grandfather, about what he planned to do with his fortune. Marcus said nothing, just walked forward step by step, his cane finding solid ground, his eyes fixed on the black SUV waiting at the curb. Samuel walked beside him, one hand on his shoulder, the other raised to ward off the most aggressive journalists. They made it to the car. Samuel opened the door. Marcus climbed inside. Silence. The door closed, and suddenly the chaos was muffled, distant, like a storm viewed through glass. Marcus leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. "You okay?" Samuel asked from the driver's seat. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he opened his eyes and looked at his friend. "I don't know what I am right now." Samuel nodded slowly. "That's fair. You just won a $260 million judgment. That's a lot to process." "It's not the money." "I know." Marcus stared out the window at the courthouse, at the reporters still gathered on the steps, at the world that had suddenly become very different. "He saw me," Marcus said quietly. "My grandfather. For 20 years he watched me, believed in me, waited for the right moment to give me everything he had, and I never knew." Samuel was silent. "I spent so long thinking I was alone, thinking no one in my family gave a damn whether I lived or died. And the whole time there was this old man in Virginia, writing letters he never sent, keeping records, protecting a secret that would change my life." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "I just wish I could have met him, really met him, talked to him, thanked him." Samuel reached over and gripped his shoulder. He knew Marcus, the way he wrote about you in those journals. He knew exactly who you were, and he was proud of you, more proud than he ever was of anyone else in that family. Marcus nodded slowly. The words didn't fill the hole, not completely, but they helped. "So what now?" Samuel asked. "You're one of the wealthiest men in Virginia, probably in the country. What are you going to do with it?" Marcus looked out at the courthouse one more time, at the reporters, at the sky above, grey and heavy with clouds that hadn't yet decided whether to rain. He thought about his grandfather, who had spent 40 years protecting something he believed in. He thought about the soldiers he'd served with, the ones who came home broken and were forgotten by a country that owed them everything. He thought about the boy he'd been, sleeping under bridges, eating out of trash cans, wondering if anyone would notice if he simply stopped existing. "Now I do what soldiers do," Marcus said finally. "I rebuild." Samuel smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The SUV pulled away from the courthouse, leaving the chaos behind. Marcus watched through the window as the building shrank in the distance, then disappeared entirely. $263 million, a grandfather's legacy, a family's betrayal, and now, finally, the chance to build something that mattered. The wolves had come, and Marcus Reeves had won. 6 months later, the Virginia mountains looked different. Not the land itself. The hills still rolled toward the horizon in waves of green and gold. The creek still sparkled in the afternoon sun. The oak tree still stood sentinel at the edge of the property, like it had for 200 years. Nature didn't care about courtroom victories or inheritance battles or the quiet revolution happening in its midst. But everything else had changed. Marcus stood at the top of the hill overlooking the valley, his cane planted firmly in the soft earth, watching the construction crews below. Where the crumbling concrete building had once stood, the decoy his grandfather had used to hide the bunker's true purpose, a new structure was rising. Timber frame, stone foundation, large windows that would catch the morning light and hold it like a promise. The sign out front was already installed, even though the building wouldn't be finished for another 3 months. Hand-carved letters on a slab of oak from the property itself. The Colonel Raymond Reeves Veterans Center. Marcus read those words every morning. Sometimes he read them at night too, when the construction crews had gone home and the valley fell silent, and the weight of everything he was building pressed down on his shoulders like a physical thing. His grandfather had protected a secret for 40 years. Now Marcus was building a legacy. The idea had come to him in pieces, fragments of thought that slowly assembled themselves into something coherent during the long weeks after the trial. He'd lie awake at night in the small farmhouse he'd purchased a mile from the property. Nothing fancy, just 4 rooms and a porch and enough land to breathe, and he'd think about what he wanted to do with $263 million. The obvious answer was nothing. Keep it. Invest it. Live comfortably for the rest of his life and never worry about rent or medical bills or whether his truck would start in the morning. But that answer felt wrong. Hollow. Like betraying something his grandfather had tried to teach him. Some things are worth more than money. Marcus had read those words 100 times in the Colonel's journals, had traced the shaky handwriting with his fingertips, trying to absorb whatever wisdom the old man had left behind. And slowly he'd begun to understand what his grandfather meant. The gold wasn't the inheritance. Not really. The inheritance was purpose. The inheritance was the chance to do something that mattered. The inheritance was 40 years of lonely guardianship, finally bearing fruit in a way the Colonel could never have imagined. Marcus wasn't going to hoard his fortune. He was going to use it. The Veterans Center was the first piece. He'd worked with architects, designers, social workers, people who understood what wounded soldiers needed when they came home to a country that often forgot them. The building would house counseling services, job training programs, emergency housing for veterans who had nowhere else to go. There would be a medical clinic staffed by doctors who specialized in trauma, both physical and psychological. There would be a workshop where veterans could learn trades, mechanics, carpentry, welding, the kind of skills that gave a man dignity and purpose. And in the basement, accessible through a secure entrance, the bunker would remain, not as a secret anymore, but as a museum, a testament to Cold War history, to the men and women who had served in shadows, to operations that officially never existed but had shaped the world nonetheless. Visitors would be able to tour portions of the facility, see the preserved artifacts, learn about a chapter of American history that had been buried for decades. The gold was gone now, liquidated through a complex series of transactions that Samuel had orchestrated with the kind of precision that came from years of navigating legal minefields. The proceeds sat in investment accounts managed by a team of financial advisors Marcus had vetted personally. The returns would fund the center in perpetuity, ensuring that it would continue operating long after Marcus was gone. $263 million, transformed into something that would outlast them all. The farmhouse was quiet when Marcus returned that evening. He'd never been one for luxury, even now that he could afford anything he wanted. The house had belonged to an elderly couple who'd passed within months of each other, their children too scattered to care about a property this remote. Marcus had bought it for a fraction of what he could have spent, fixed up the plumbing himself, replaced the roof with help from a crew of local contractors who still couldn't quite believe the quiet veteran with the limp was worth more than most small countries. He lived simply. Same boots he'd worn for years, same flannel shirts, same beat-up truck, though he'd finally replaced the transmission and given the engine the overhaul it deserved. The money hadn't changed who he was. It had just given him the resources to become who he'd always wanted to be. He sat on the porch as the sun went down, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance across the meadow. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out. The world felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for 20 years. His phone buzzed. "Samuel, how's the construction coming?" Marcus smiled. "On schedule, maybe even a little ahead. The crew's good, motivated." "They should be. You're paying them double the going rate. They're building something that matters. They deserve to be paid like it." Samuel chuckled. "You're going to be a terrible rich person, you know that? Most billionaires try to squeeze every penny. You're out here giving raises to construction workers." "I'm not a billionaire." "Close enough. And getting closer, the way those investments are performing." Samuel paused. "Listen, I called for a reason. We got another letter from Troy's lawyer." Marcus's jaw tightened. What do they want now? Same thing they've wanted for 6 months. A meeting, a conversation. Troy says he wants to apologize, make things right. Troy wants access to money he thinks should be his. Probably. But the letter's different this time. More personal. He wrote part of it himself, not just the lawyer. Samuel hesitated. "You want me to read it to you?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The fireflies danced. The owl called again. "No," he said finally, "I don't." "You sure? It might—" "Sam, I spent 20 years rebuilding my life from nothing. 20 years wondering if my own family would ever acknowledge what they did to me. 20 years sleeping under bridges, eating out of trash cans, working jobs that broke my body just to afford a room with a roof that didn't leak." His voice was steady, but there was iron underneath it. "They had 20 years to apologize, 20 years to pick up a phone, write a letter, show up at my door and say they were sorry. They didn't. And now, suddenly, when there's money involved, they want to make things right." Marcus shook his head, even though Samuel couldn't see it. "Some wounds don't heal with words. Some people don't deserve forgiveness. They deserve distance. Troy and Denise made their choices a long time ago. I've made mine." Samuel was silent for a moment. Then, "Okay, I'll let them know the answer hasn't changed. Thank you." "Marcus?" "Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you're making the right call. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're survival." Marcus smiled faintly. "Someone smart told me that once. Must have been a hell of a guy." "He was okay." They said their goodbyes. Marcus set the phone aside and watched the last light fade from the sky. He didn't feel guilty about his decision, didn't feel conflicted or torn. Troy and Denise were strangers now, had been strangers for 2 decades, even when they shared blood. Whatever connection they'd once had, they had severed it themselves. Marcus wasn't obligated to rebuild what they had destroyed. He had more important things to build. The Veterans Center opened on a Saturday in late October. The trees had turned by then, red and gold and orange painting the mountains like a masterpiece, and the air carried the crisp bite of approaching winter. Marcus stood at the entrance, watching the cars arrive, feeling something swell in his chest that he couldn't quite name. They came in waves. Veterans from 3 states, some in wheelchairs, some on crutches, some walking with the same careful gait Marcus knew too well. Families came too, wives, children, parents whose eyes held the particular grief of watching someone they loved return from war forever changed. Local politicians showed up for photo opportunities. Reporters circled with cameras and microphones. Even a few representatives from the Department of Defense appeared, quiet men in suits who shook Marcus's hand and spoke in careful phrases about cooperation and gratitude. But none of that mattered to Marcus. What mattered was the young woman who rolled through the doors in a wheelchair, her legs gone below the knee, her eyes scanning the space like she couldn't quite believe it was real. What mattered was the older man who stood in the job training workshop, running his fingers along the tools mounted on the wall, tears streaming down his weathered face. What mattered was the children who ran through the halls, laughing, while their veteran parents sat in the counseling center and spoke about things they'd never been able to say before. This was what his grandfather's gold had become, not a fortune hoarded in darkness, but light, spreading outward, touching lives, proving that some things truly were worth more than money. Samuel found him on the steps outside, away from the crowds, watching the sun move across the valley. "Hell of a turnout," Samuel said. "More than I expected." "You should be inside, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. This is your moment, Marcus." Marcus shook his head slowly. "It's not about me. Never was. My grandfather spent 40 years in the shadows, protecting something he believed in. I'm just doing the same thing. Different shadows, maybe, but the same purpose." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down beside Marcus on the steps. "You know, when you called me 6 months ago, told me you'd found a bunker full of gold under a piece of land in Virginia, I thought you'd lost your mind. Figured the stress had finally cracked you." Marcus smiled. "Fair assumption. But this," Samuel gestured at the building behind them, at the people inside, at everything Marcus had built. "This is something else. This is legacy, Marcus. Real legacy. The kind that outlasts money and fame and all the bullshit people chase their whole lives." He paused. "Your grandfather would be proud, and so am I." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. They sat together in silence as the afternoon light turned golden, 2 soldiers at rest, watching something beautiful grow from the ashes of the past. The first winter was hard, not on the center, that was thriving beyond Marcus's wildest projections, but on Marcus himself. The cold settled into his bones, aggravating the old injuries that had never fully healed. There were mornings when he could barely get out of bed, days when the pain in his leg was so intense he could feel it in his teeth. But he kept moving, kept showing up, kept doing the work. He hired a staff to run the day-to-day operations, social workers, counselors, administrators who knew more about nonprofit management than he ever would. But he was there every week, walking the halls, talking to veterans, listening to their stories. Sometimes that was all they needed. Someone who understood. Someone who had been there. One evening in February, a young man arrived at the center. His name was Derek, 26 years old, recently discharged after losing his leg to an IED in Syria, the same kind of explosion that had shattered Marcus's spine 20 years before. He came alone, no family, no friends, just a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and a look in his eyes that Marcus recognized immediately. The look of a man who had stopped believing the world had a place for him. Marcus met him in the lobby, didn't shake hands, didn't offer the usual platitudes, just looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Rough day." Derek let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Rough year. Yeah, I know how that feels. They sat on the porch together, despite the cold, wrapped in army surplus blankets Marcus kept by the door for exactly this purpose. Marcus didn't push, didn't ask questions, just sat beside the young man as the night deepened and the stars emerged one by one, like promises someone might actually keep. Finally, Derek spoke. I don't know why I came here. I don't have anywhere else to go, but that's not... He stopped, struggled for words. I feel like I'm already dead. Like the part of me that mattered got left in the desert, and what came back is just empty, broken, useless. Marcus nodded slowly. I felt that way once, for a long time actually. After I got hurt, after I came home, after... He paused, choosing his words carefully. After some things happened that made me think maybe the world would be better off without me in it. Derek looked at him, surprise flickering in his eyes. But here's what I learned, Marcus continued. The broken feeling, it's not the end, it's the beginning. It's your mind trying to rebuild itself, trying to figure out who you are now that everything's changed. And that process, it hurts. It hurts more than the physical wounds sometimes, but it doesn't last forever. He turned to face Derek fully. You're not useless, you're not empty, you're wounded, and wounds need time to heal. That's why this place exists. Not to fix you, you don't need fixing, but to give you space, time, people who understand what you're carrying. Derek's face crumpled. The tough guy mask he'd been wearing since he walked through the door finally cracked, and beneath it was just a kid. A scared, hurting kid who had given part of himself for his country and gotten broken in return. I don't know how to do this, Derek whispered. I don't know how to be... this. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to know, not yet. Right now all you have to do is stay, eat a meal, sleep somewhere warm, and tomorrow we'll figure out the next step together. He paused. You're not alone, Derek, not anymore. That's what this place is for. Derek stayed. He got a room in the residential wing, started working with the counselors, began the slow process of learning to walk again, figuratively and literally. Marcus checked on him every few days, not pushing, just present, available, the way he wished someone had been for him all those years ago. And slowly, painfully, Derek began to heal. The center grew. Word spread through veteran networks, through social media, through the quiet recommendations of one soldier to another. Within a year, the residential wing was full. Within 2, Marcus had purchased adjacent land and begun construction on expansion facilities. There were setbacks, of course, funding challenges, staffing shortages, a political battle over zoning that dragged on for months before Samuel worked his legal magic. One night, someone spray-painted obscenities on the front entrance, local kids with too much time and too little understanding, and Marcus spent an hour scrubbing the walls himself before anyone else arrived in the morning. But for every setback, there were 10 victories. The veteran who got his contractor's license through the job training program and started his own business. The mother who found childcare support while she finished her nursing degree. The couple who met in group therapy and got married in the center's chapel, their vows witnessed by 50 people who had become family. Marcus didn't take credit for any of it. When reporters came, and they came often, drawn by the story of the disabled veteran who had inherited a fortune and built something beautiful, he deflected attention to the staff, the volunteers, the community that had grown around the center like a garden. I just opened the door, he would say. They did the rest. But everyone knew the truth. Marcus Reeves had done more than open a door. He had built a home for people who thought they didn't have one. He had turned Cold War gold into something warm, something alive, something that would continue growing long after he was gone. One evening, 3 years after the center opened, Marcus descended into the bunker alone. It was different now. The gold was gone, replaced by museum displays and informational plaques. The lighting was soft, professional, designed by experts who understood how to make history feel accessible. Visitors could walk through designated sections, learn about the Cold War, see artifacts that had been hidden for half a century. But there was one area that remained off-limits to the public. A small chamber at the back, behind a door that only Marcus had the key to. His grandfather's desk. The journals were still there, preserved behind glass now but still visible. The letters too, the ones the colonel had written to Marcus over 20 years but never sent. And on the wall, a photograph Marcus had added himself. Raymond Reeves in uniform, young and strong, standing beside the steel hatch that had guarded his secrets for 4 decades. Marcus sat in the chair behind the desk, the same chair his grandfather had used for all those years, maintaining this place in solitude, waiting for someone worthy to inherit it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something he'd been carrying since the day he found it, the key to the hatch, the key that had unlocked everything. He placed it on the desk next to the journals. "I don't know if you can hear me," Marcus said quietly. "I don't know if any of this, the center, the foundation, everything I've tried to build, is what you would have wanted. But I hope it is." He paused, looking at the photograph on the wall. "You watched me for 20 years. You saw me at my worst, homeless, broken, forgotten. And you still believed in me, still saved everything you had for me, still wrote letters telling me you were proud, even when I couldn't hear you." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "I wish I could have known you, really known you, talked to you about the war, about the missions, about what it meant to carry secrets for so long. I wish I could have thanked you in person." He touched the glass case protecting the journals. "But I think you knew. I think that's why you did it this way, because you understood that some gifts can't be explained. They can only be received." Marcus stood slowly, his leg aching from the cold underground air. "I'll keep building, keep protecting, keep doing the work you started. And when my time comes, I'll make sure someone else carries it forward. Someone who understands what honor means." He looked around the chamber one last time. "Thank you, grandfather, for everything." Then he turned off the light and climbed the stairs into the world above. The afternoon sun was warm on Marcus's face as he sat on the porch of the Veterans Center. 5 years had passed since the doors first opened. 5 years of growth, challenge, triumph, and the slow accumulation of moments that add up to a life well lived. Derek sat beside him now, no longer a broken kid, but a man of 31 with a prosthetic leg, a job at the center as a peer counselor, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from walking through fire and emerging on the other side. "You hear about the new expansion?" Derek asked. "The board approved funding for a facility in North Carolina. 3 years, they say, maybe 4. Marcus nodded. "I heard. They want to call it the Reeves North Campus." Derek grinned. "Has a nice ring to it." "Too many things named after me already. I keep telling them to pick someone else." "And they keep ignoring you. Funny how that works." Marcus chuckled despite himself. It was strange, being known, being remembered. For so long he had lived in shadows, invisible, forgotten, erased by the people who should have loved him most. Now his name was on buildings, in newspapers, spoken with respect by people he had never met. He still wasn't comfortable with it. Probably never would be. But he had made peace with the reality that some things were bigger than his own discomfort. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found that bunker?" Derek asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Sometimes. I'd probably still be in Kentucky, still fixing engines in other people's garages, still surviving, day by day, the way I had been for 20 years. He paused. "But I wouldn't have met you, wouldn't have met any of them." He gestured at the center behind them, at the veterans walking the grounds, at the life that pulsed through every corner of this place. "Sometimes I think the gold wasn't the real treasure, it was the permission." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Permission? to dream, to build, to believe I could do something that mattered. Marcus looked out at the valley, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the sky stretching endless above them all. I had those dreams before, when I was young, but the war, the injuries, the betrayal, they beat them out of me. I learned to survive, but I forgot how to hope. He turned to face Derek. The money gave me resources, but my grandfather gave me something more important. He gave me proof that someone had believed in me, that someone had seen me, even when I couldn't see myself. Derek nodded slowly. I think I understand that. I know you do. That's why you're going to run this place someday. Derek blinked. What? Marcus smiled. The board's been after me for years to name a successor, someone to take over when I'm gone. I've been putting it off because I couldn't find anyone who understood what this place really means, what it's really for. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folder. Thin, official-looking, the kind of document that changed lives. But now I have. Derek stared at the folder like it might bite him. Marcus, I can't. You can, and you will. Marcus pressed the folder into Derek's hands. Not today, not tomorrow. There's training, preparation, a whole transition plan the lawyers have been working on. But eventually, yes, you're the one. Derek was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. Why me? Marcus leaned back in his chair, remembering another conversation years ago with a young man who had arrived at this center believing he was already dead. Because you survived, because you rebuilt, because you understand that this place isn't about money or programs or buildings. It's about giving people a reason to believe they're worth saving. He put a hand on Derek's shoulder. My grandfather passed this to me because I'd earned it. Now I'm passing it to you for the same reason. That's how legacy works, Derek. It's not inherited. It's entrusted. Derek's eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. I won't let you down. I know you won't. They sat together as the afternoon faded into evening, two soldiers at rest, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not from Troy or Denise. Marcus hadn't heard from them in years, not since the final court ruling had closed every legal avenue they might have pursued. They had faded into distant memory, ghosts of a past he had left behind. This letter was from someone else. Marcus opened it at his kitchen table, reading slowly in the morning light. Dear Mr. Reeves, you don't know me. My name is Amanda Lawson. My father served with your grandfather in Vietnam. He passed away last month, and while going through his things, I found letters. Letters from Colonel Raymond Reeves that my father had saved for over 50 years. I didn't know what to do with them at first. But then I heard about your center, about what you've built, and I thought you should have them. They're not about gold or secrets or Cold War operations. They're about friendship, about the bond between soldiers who trusted each other with their lives. I'm enclosing copies. The originals will stay with my family, but I wanted you to see them, to know that your grandfather was loved by people outside your family too, that he mattered to men who served beside him, even if the world never knew their names. Thank you for honoring his memory. Thank you for building something beautiful from the ashes of the past. Sincerely, Amanda Lawson. Marcus set the letter down and opened the envelope of copies. The handwriting was his grandfather's, younger, stronger, full of the vitality of a man still in his prime. The letters spanned decades, from Vietnam through the Cold War, through the long, quiet years of retirement. They talked about missions and families, about regrets and hopes, about the particular loneliness of keeping secrets no one else could share. But woven through all of it was warmth, friendship, the kind of bond that forms between soldiers who have faced death together and emerged on the other side. Your grandson is growing up, one letter read. I saw a photograph his mother sent. He has his father's eyes. I hope someday I'll have the courage to reach out to him, to tell him what his family means to me, even from a distance. Marcus read that line 3 times. His grandfather hadn't just been watching him out of duty. He had cared, genuinely, deeply cared, and he had struggled with the same fears and doubts that plague all of us, the fear of rejection, the doubt that we'll be wanted, the worry that our love won't be received. But he had left everything to Marcus anyway, had trusted that, somehow, the message would get through. And it had. Marcus refolded the letters carefully, placed them back in the envelope, and sat for a long time in the morning light. Some things, he realized, never truly ended. They just changed form, transforming from gold into buildings, from secrets into museums, from silence into stories that would be told for generations. His grandfather's legacy wasn't the bunker or the fortune or the Cold War artifacts. It was the love that had survived 50 years of separation, the belief that had persisted across decades of distance, the hope that had refused to die even when death itself had come. And now that legacy was Marcus's to carry forward. Not alone, never alone again, but with Derek, with the staff of the center, with the thousands of veterans who had found hope within its walls. The torch had been passed, and it would keep burning. Marcus returned to the bunker one final time. He was 72 years old now, his hair gone fully grey, his limp more pronounced, his body carrying 30 years of additional wear since he'd first descended those stairs. Derek ran the center with steady hands, had been running it for over a decade. The foundations Marcus had built were solid, self-sustaining, designed to outlast any individual life. But there was one more thing he needed to do. The chamber behind the locked door was exactly as he'd left it. His grandfather's desk, the journals behind glass, the photograph on the wall, and beside it now a second photograph, Marcus himself, standing at the entrance of the Veterans Center on opening day, surrounded by the people who had made it possible. Marcus placed something new on the desk, a letter, addressed to whoever comes next. He had written it that morning, taking his time with each word, trying to capture everything he had learned over 30 years of carrying his grandfather's legacy. To whoever finds this, if you're reading these words, then the torch has passed again. Maybe you inherited this place, or maybe you earned your way here like I did. Either way, you now hold something precious, not just money or artifacts, but meaning. My grandfather taught me that some things are worth more than money. He was right. But he also taught me something else, something I didn't understand until I'd lived it for myself. Legacy isn't what you keep, it's what you give. The gold is gone now, transformed into something that will last longer than metal ever could. Buildings that shelter the broken, programs that lift the fallen, hope that spreads outward like light from a single flame. That's your inheritance now. Not the things, but the purpose. Not the wealth, but the mission. Protect it, nurture it, pass it on when your time comes. And remember, blood doesn't make family, honor does. With respect and hope, Marcus Reeves. He sealed the letter, placed it beside his grandfather's journals, and stood for a long moment in the silence. The bunker felt different now, not cold but peaceful, not empty, but full of history, memory, sacrifice, love. 3 generations of soldiers had touched this place. 3 generations had carried its secrets. And now, finally, those secrets had been transformed into something the world could see and share. Marcus touched the glass case one final time. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Then he climbed the stairs, sealed the hatch, and walked into the sunlight. The afternoon was warm, the kind of late summer day that made the valley glow like something from a dream. Veterans moved across the grounds below, some in wheelchairs, some on crutches, some walking with the careful gait of people learning to trust their bodies again. Children ran between them, laughing. Families gathered on the lawn for a weekend barbecue. The smell of grilled burgers drifted up the hill, mixing with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Marcus watched it all from the oak tree at the edge of the property, the same tree where he had found the key 30 years before. He leaned against its ancient trunk, feeling the rough bark through his shirt, letting the peace of the moment wash over him. Derek found him there 20 minutes later. "Thought you might be up here," Derek said, settling onto the grass beside him. "You okay?" Marcus smiled. "Better than okay." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the life unfold below them. "You know," Marcus said finally, "when I first came here, I thought my life was over. I was 42 years old, broken in every way a man can be broken. I'd lost everything, my health, my savings, my family. I thought I was just going to fade away, forgotten and alone." He paused, looking at the center, at the veterans, at everything he had built. "But it wasn't over, it was just beginning. I just couldn't see it yet." Derek nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. I know you do." Marcus turned to face him. "That's why I chose you, because you understand that endings are just disguises. They look like death, but they're really transformation. The caterpillar doesn't die, it becomes the butterfly. The seed doesn't die, it becomes the tree." He gestured at the oak above them, its branches spreading wide against the summer sky. "This tree has been here for 200 years. It's seen wars, it's seen peace, it's seen my grandfather hide a key in its hollow, and it's seen me find that key 3 decades later. And it'll be here long after both of us are gone, watching whoever comes next." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass key, the same one his grandfather had left for him, worn smooth now from years of handling. "Take it." Derek hesitated. "Marcus, take it. It's yours now. The key, the bunker, everything inside it. Not because you need it, but because you've earned it, because you're ready." Derek accepted the key slowly, turning it over in his hands, feeling its weight. "What do I do with it?" Marcus smiled, the same smile his grandfather had worn in that photograph on the wall, calm and proud and full of hope. "Whatever you need to, whatever serves the mission, that's the only rule. Serve the mission. Everything else is just details." They sat together as the sun began its descent, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Below them, the veteran center hummed with life. Above them, the oak tree whispered in the breeze. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, in a chamber that had held secrets for 60 years, a letter waited. A new chapter of an old story, ready to be read. Anyone can rebuild after betrayal if they have the courage to believe they're worth saving, and the wisdom to know that true wealth isn't what you keep, but what you give. As the last light faded over the Virginia mountains, Marcus Reeves closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the place he had built. The laughter, the conversations, the quiet moments of connection between people who had once believed they were alone. His grandfather had protected a secret for 40 years, waiting for the right person to inherit it. Marcus had transformed that secret into something alive, something growing, something that would continue long after his own story ended. He thought about Troy and Denise, somewhere out there, living with the choices they had made. He felt no anger anymore, no bitterness, just distance. Some bridges were meant to burn, some wounds were meant to scar, and some people were meant to be left behind. He thought about his mother who had died believing lies about her own son. He hoped, wherever she was, that she knew the truth now. That she understood he had never abandoned her, never stopped loving her, never stopped being the son she had raised him to be. And he thought about his grandfather, the quiet soldier who had watched from a distance, who had believed when no one else did, who had left behind a gift so profound it had changed the course of a life. Blood doesn't make family. Honor does. Marcus had lived those words for 30 years, had built a legacy on their foundation, had proven through action and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to give up that the old colonel had been right all along. Some things were worth more than money. But Marcus Reeves had earned both, and he had given them away. The veteran's center glowed below him, lights coming on against the gathering dusk. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more veterans to help, more programs to build, more lives to change. The mission never ended, it just evolved. But tonight, Marcus sat beneath the oak tree and watched the stars emerge, one by one, like promises someone had finally kept. He was 72 years old. His body was tired, his leg ached from the cold, but his heart was full. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Reeves was truly, completely, peacefully home. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of hope, heart, and second chances. Click to keep the journey going, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that what we give away matters more than what we keep.